belong to shapes who you are. Who you pledge allegiance to, who you call master, shapes who you are. In Matthew chapter 22, the answer to the question is almost as interesting to me as the question itself. You see, Jesus is standing in the temple when he is handed a Roman coin, and he is tossed this question: should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, the interesting thing is that the question really isn't about taxes. It really isn't about wealth. The question is about allegiance. The question is about who you belong to, because taxes in the ancient world was a weapon of subjugation. It was a movement of ownership, that you pay taxes to the one who is your master. And Jesus takes a look at the coin and he asks a question in return. Chapter 22, verse 20, he says, whose image is on this coin? And the crowd kind of looks around, thinks, and finally somebody has the audacity to pipe up in verse 21, Caesar's. It's Caesar's image. In verse 21, Jesus then responds, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what belongs to God. You see, this whole conversation, all of this question, it is not about taxes. It's not about the money. It's a question about ownership. It's a question about who do you belong to. And Jesus' answer is that whatever bears the image is connected to the one whose image it is to begin with. And that's where Jesus brings up this fascinating text from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. You see, in Genesis chapter 1, God had done some amazing things in creation already. He'd already said, let there be light. He had already gone through 5 days of creating this amazing context with which animals and plants could interact with God. But then on day 6, God created humanity. And he created humanity in the image of God, which is a startling move. That the Creator desires to have, on some level, creation bearing his image. As a matter of fact, whenever God even talks about this in Genesis 1, 26 through 27, he gets giddy. Like my kiddos from a session or two ago, he starts to repeat the same word over and over and over. Genesis 1:26, it says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And you can almost hear the text say, in his image. That there's something about this movement of God towards us. There's something that makes humanity unique from all of creation. This precious gift of having the image of God emblazoned on us. The image of God impressed on us. And it is a gift that is so precious, that is so profound and so pervasive, that even in Genesis 3, whenever sin comes into the scene, it does not obliterate the image of God in us. Indeed, it covers the image of God with sin and darkness. But inside of all of us, both Christian and non, there is still this image of God that is crying out, that is longing, that is desiring, that is moving toward the one in whose image we were created in the beginning. The image of God in us creates a longing. And what sin is an attempt to respond to this craving with material things. Here's the problem. Those material things will never satisfy this craving for God. No matter how much we try, no matter what we try to dump, the material things are never enough. In Daniel chapter 5, we come face to face with an issue that oftentimes we don't think is connected to identity, but it is actually quite central. We come face to face with the topic of wealth. With wealth. Wealth is not just about money. Wealth is about ownership. Wealth is about identity. Because as Jesus reminds us in Matthew 19, wealth's desire is to become our master, and we cannot serve two masters. So what I want us to do is to have these two poles, wealth and the image of God, framing our discussion of Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5 begins with a party. Belshazzar is the king. Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is now dead. And King Belshazzar gives this great banquet with thousands of nobles, and he is flowing with wine. Luxurious in his grandeur. But the wine's not enough. So in verse 2, while they're drinking wine, they decide to start bringing out all kinds of gold and silver goblets. And they start to bring in the concubines, and they all start drinking with the nobles. More wealth, but it wasn't enough. So in verse 3, they decide to bring in the goblets that were in the temple of God in Jerusalem, celebrating a victory over a people that has increased their wealth. But here's the problem. It wasn't enough. So then in verse 4, with all of their drinking of the wine, they decided to turn this party into a worship setting for things. It says this, as they drank the wine, verse 4, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. But here's the problem. They're worshiping their master, wealth, but it is never enough. And as this incredibly offensive, this incredibly pagan worship service around wealth is happening, all of a sudden, a human hand appears, and it starts writing on the wall. And King Belshazzar, he absolutely freaks out. Verse 6 says, his face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. He knew that whatever was happening, whatever message was being scrawled out on the wall, it was being done by a power that was far beyond any of his wealth that he has been celebrating with so far. He is terrified. He is overwhelmed. And so what does the king do? He turns to wealth to deliver him. Verse 7. The king summoned the enchanters and astrologers and diviners, and then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Did you see what he did? He's confronted by this terrifying problem. And his solution is to ask his master for help, is to ask wealth to deliver him. If you tell me what this says, I will allow you to worship the master of wealth. But here's the problem. Wealth couldn't deliver. Verse 8, then all the king's wise men came in, but they couldn't read the writing or tell the king what it meant. And the problem is, this had never happened to Belshazzar before. He's always been able to turn to wealth, and it was always able to deliver him whatever he needed. If he needed an escape from his troubles, he could turn to wealth, because it always gives a temporary high. It always gives a temporary numbness. But now he's faced with an issue that even wealth can't deliver. Verse 9. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled, and so was the king, because wealth had never failed him like this before. And in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this reckoning, King Belshazzar's queen chimes in and says, don't be alarmed, verse 10. Don't look so pale. She then moves into verse 12 and says this, call for Daniel. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. What would make her think of Daniel? Well, King Belshazzar's dad was Nebuchadnezzar. And this isn't the first time Daniel has had to be called in, and even in this book, in recent memory, in order to give an interpretation that the other wise men couldn't. This happened in Daniel 2 with the dream of the statue. This happened just in the last chapter, Daniel 4, with the dream of the tree, where the wise men could not or would not interpret the dream. And now, once again, Daniel is called in for the third time in the book. And what is really fascinating about this third time is that once again, Daniel is offered wealth. He is offered wealth as his reward. Verse 16, it says, Belshazzar says, if you can read this, Daniel, if you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain around your neck, and you will be made third highest ruler in the kingdom. I will let you be clothed and embraced by my master wealth. And I love Daniel's answer. Daniel in verse 17 says, you can keep your wealth. He says, you can keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. The reason why I love that answer is because
Why did you do that?